hot.
It's 5:05. Welcome into a Thursday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. Well, yesterday, more than $500 million in new relief aid was signed into law by Governor Josh Stein, and that is heading to Western North Carolina. A cash injection intended to boost rebuilding efforts in the region after the devastation of Hurricane Helene. Governor Josh Stein signed the bill into law, I should say, his first as governor, containing at least $524 million in relief aid late yesterday. This is after lawmakers unanimously approved the funding in the Senate. I mentioned yesterday morning that we thought this would move pretty quickly, and a late-night signing ceremony last night. Stein said during the ceremony, which featured both Republican and Democratic legislative leaders, quote, "Urgency is driving us so much that when these guys passed the bill this afternoon, I asked them, could they come over tonight? I didn't want to wait until tomorrow to sign this bill because it's that important." The money is mostly aimed at kickstarting efforts to rebuild homes, farms, and private roads in Western North Carolina. It also has money for a tourism campaign, which is one of the main drivers of the Western North Carolina economy, both in the spring and in the fall, and funds to help local governments rebuild their downtown districts. Stein previously said he would sign the bill even though the deal negotiated by Republican legislative leaders is only half of what he requested. He requested about $1 billion. The measure omitted Stein's request for 2 business grant programs designed to help companies that suffered significant sales and economic loss or physical damage. Lawmakers called the bill Part 1 of the 2025 Hurricane Helene recovery efforts. Part 2 is likely several months away. Stein said yesterday that his administration would immediately start on another proposal for more funding to present to the legislature, with the governor saying, quote, "We have to reduce the risk of wildfires, particularly as the summer starts to come. We need to invest in resiliency, whether that's how to deal with flooding or down power lines or any other way to make sure that if the next storm comes, we are better prepared to handle it." After Stein gave the aid's final approval Wednesday evening, top-ranking Senate leader Phil Berger, the Republican out of Rockingham County, said he expected the next round of aid would come in the state budget. Lawmakers were scheduled to discuss future funding Thursday during a joint appropriations committee meeting that is happening at the GA this afternoon. While the budget is technically due by July 1st, lawmakers often blow past that deadline by months. That's been at least the current trend in North Carolina if they pass a spending plan at all. The legislature failed to pass a new budget last year, and Berger said that if the 2025 budget debate runs into problems, they would support passing a separate Helene aid in a completely different bill. House Speaker Destin Hall said during Stein's ceremony at the governor's mansion, quote, "The number one priority we have at the General Assembly this session is Hurricane Helene recovery, and it's going to stay that way until we fix the problem." He noted the level of compromise between the House, Senate, and Governor Stein requiring to turn the bill around so quickly into law. Hall said, quote, "Tomorrow we'll begin working on the next round of relief for Helene because it's going to be a long recovery with incredible devastation in Western North Carolina." The most destructive storm in state history, Helene killed more than 100 North Carolinians and did an estimated $60 billion in damage to the western part of the state last fall, including tens of thousands of homes, over 70+ thousand homes, and businesses damaged or entirely destroyed in the devastation from that storm. Just a quick recap, lawmakers approved roughly $1 billion in state aid last year to supplement a projected $15 billion from the federal government, but some federal funding, including monies to start rebuilding homes, is still at least several months away from reaching North Carolina. This new infusion of cash from state taxpayers will allow the work to begin on rebuilding homes in the meantime. The bill also funds efforts to rebuild farms, private roads, and other relief efforts. We'll continue to track these details of Governor Josh Stein signing his first bill into law yesterday, another $524 million in relief for Western North Carolina. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour, where it's now 5:10, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are tracking some new legislation in the North Carolina General Assembly this morning that would try to rein in government and add some more accountability. To get some additional details on that, Jon Sanders from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. John, for folks that have been on our website over the last couple of days, they may have seen something about the REINS Act, a big press conference a Wednesday afternoon dealing with that. Can you walk us through those details?
Sure, absolutely. The REINS Act, I think, is a very exciting regulatory reform, and it deals with, it's kind of inside baseball maybe for regulatory policy, but it deals with the fact that the legislature is the one that's in control of making the rules, of making the laws, and they give this power to make rules to the regulatory agencies. So that's a delegated authority. The executive branch runs the agencies, and they have this delegated authority to make laws, basically which are what rules are. It's much more easy to make rules than it is to pass a law. Just because a bill is made into a law, just because a bill is crafted doesn't mean it's going to become law. But pretty much any time a rule is proposed, it has to jump through some hoops, but almost every one of them becomes a final rule, which means it's a lot easier to create a lot of mischief on the regulatory side. So what the REINS Act does is it would make it where if the regulatory agency wants to create a very expensive rule for the private sector, that the legislature, which has the actual power to do this, gets to look at it one more time and say, wait, yeah, okay, this is out of control, or all right, I understand this is necessary, so we'll allow it to go forward.
As I understand the legislation as it's been proposed in both the House and the Senate, any of these rules or regulations brought forth by any of these agencies in the state that would have around $1 million impact over a 12-month period of time would be open to this period in which it could be brought in front of the General Assembly. Walk us through that process.
Yes, so essentially the REINS Act doesn't want to deal with minor rules or just this is how we're going to do things in our agency. This is how things are going to be managed. It's going to look at things that have a significant impact on the private sector, defined currently in the bill as $1 million in 1 year. So if that happens, they can go through the rulemaking process, but that rule cannot take effect until the General Assembly ratifies a bill allowing it to take effect. So that would submit it to the lawmaking process, which requires a great deal more of introspection and discussion among legislators. It's not just a fait accompli, that it has to be looked at by the legislature, which is what we want.
Explain a little bit more about that. Again, you already walked us through the process, what goes on in the General Assembly. We've got bills that become laws if they can get through both chambers and are signed by the governor. But John, as I see it, when folks talk about the bureaucracy, talk about government, it seems like a lot of that really bubbles to the surface in regards to these rules and regulations that come out of these various agencies with very little transparency and very little oversight.
Well, I look at it just as an economist. I mean, years ago, Locke did a study and found that about 1 out of 6 proposed bills eventually went to become law, whereas almost every last rule proposed eventually became a rule. So the opportunity cost of laws versus rules is much different. So it's much easier for an agency to create a rule. There's already a process where the legislature can come back and say, this isn't what we want. But the rule is already in effect in that sense, and only if the legislature takes up all the time to draft a bill, to debate the bill, for the bill to go between both chambers, for the bill to go to the different committees that want to look over it and then pass and get signed, would it actually go. So the opportunity cost and the expectation is the rule's going to be fine. Very few rules get overturned in that process. What REINS would do is automatically sideline any rule that's going to have a significant economic impact on the private sector in North Carolina until the legislature goes through that process and decides this is what we want to do. So it turns the expectations on its head, which is good for the private sector here in North Carolina.
We'll continue the conversation with Jon Sanders coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour.
Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for a look at traffic on your Thursday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick.
522, welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. We're heading back to Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts on Wednesday, April the 16th from 7 to 9 p.m. for WBT's News and Brews, and we'd want and love to see you there. All of your WBT friends will be there to raise a glass with you and talk about the news of the day. It's WBT's News and Brews, headed your way Wednesday, April the 16th at Heist Brewery and Barrel Arts. Visit WBT.com this morning for tickets and event details. We look forward to seeing you Wednesday, April the 16th. 522 now on the Carolina Journal News Hour, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We've got a press release this morning from U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. Based out of Charlotte, it reads as follows. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, along with law enforcement partners FBI, U.S. Marshal Service, and ATF, apprehended 24 illegal aliens in Charlotte during an enhanced target enforcement operation, which ran March 1st to the 8th. Charges from those arrests include the following: 13 aggregated felonies or violent offenses, 13 illegal firearms or weapon offenses, 2 MS-13 gang member affiliation cases, 1 assault on a federal officer, 5 property crimes, and 11 DWI charges. That's the news coming out of the federal government and ICE. However, it reads as follows. Of these criminal aliens, 6 had active immigration detainers, which the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Sheriff's Office had not honored. There are an additional 18 targeted aliens still at large who also had detainers that were not honored by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office. ICE has been unable to locate those individuals, and they remain at large and pose a serious potential danger to the community. These aliens could have been safely and effectively transferred into ICE custody if those detainers had been honored. This, of course, is a big story coming up. The North Carolina law now mandates all 100 sheriffs across the state to cooperate with detainers coming from ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement branch of the federal government. Charlotte-Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden has been a constant individual not following those ICE detainers. It appears that he is doing so once again now in direct opposition to state law. What are some of those consequences? What will some of those penalties look like? Oh, not immediately sure as to those details this morning. ICE says that they are focused on smart, effective immigration enforcement that protects the United States homeland through the arrest and removal of individuals who compromise the safety of our communities and the integrity of our immigration law. They note entering the United States without authorization is a violation of federal law, and those who do so may be subject to administrative arrest and, in some cases, criminal prosecution. This is likely to boil into a much larger story. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and, of course, on our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's 525, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT.
Continuing our discussion this morning on the REINS Act with Jon Sanders from the John Locke Foundation. Now, the back and forth political conversation, of course, has started with the introduction of this legislation. Democrats across the state are calling this a power grab by the Republican-led General Assembly. Would you opine on that at all?
I don't understand the whole idea that this could be a power grab by the General Assembly. The power already belongs to the General Assembly. What has been going on is that in delegating power to the agencies are taking advantage when they pass rules that go beyond what the legislature wants. That is a power grab by the agencies of power that does not belong to them. There's no complaint if the agency allows it. If the General Assembly allows it, if the legislature disallows the rule, then they are preventing a power grab. So the Democrats in this case have it completely backwards. This kind of reform has already been working in the state of Florida since 2010. And it's actually very well spoken. It was talked up in the Florida Law Journal. I think it was 2016 when this was first talked about. But what it does is it causes the agency and the General Assembly, the legislators, to get together when there's going to be a rule that's going to be deeply impactful, so that they work out the kinks beforehand, which is the good government thing that we would like to see. Not just we at Locke, but I think we citizens of North Carolina would like to see that kind of working between our branches of government.
Well, you just kind of stole my next question. I was going to ask you, is North
Sorry.
Carolina standing alone in this? You mentioned Florida. Is this something
No.
that exists in other states throughout the country as well?
Yeah, it's, I want to say Michigan has, or no, excuse me, Wisconsin has a REINS Act. Florida has had this working legislative rules ratification, which is how our REINS Act would be crafted, and it seems to be extremely valuable because of what I said. It causes the agencies and the legislature to work together, and reportedly, it's a very smooth process. The legislature has kind of boilerplate legislation for when these rules come up. There are very few rules that actually reach that threshold. So we're not talking about a great many rules that would be affected. So in this process, you would have the legislators talking about it with the agency rulemakers, and then they would bring up this boilerplate legislation for an up or down vote. And sometimes it does get voted down. Sometimes it's repeatedly voted down until the rulemakers can get it right or just decide to back off.
And again, just recapping what that burden and barrier is, any rule that comes out of any state agency that has $1 million impact over a 12-month period of time would fall under this new piece of legislation if it is to pass the House and Senate and Governor Josh Stein is to move forward with it. John, I can't help but think of some big decisions that were made back a couple of years ago out of the U.S. Supreme Court as it dealt with the Chevron doctrine. That was a huge decision that the United States Supreme Court made. It's not exactly the same, but it did have a huge impact on regulatory agencies at the federal level and their ability to essentially make law independently and not be held responsible for it.
Yeah, that was a significant ruling, obviously, and I thought very welcome because it got rid of the idea that if the regulatory agency says it, then it must be so. Incidentally, the whole idea for the REINS Act comes from a liberal Supreme Court justice. Before he was a Supreme Court justice, it was originally kind of proposed in a speech to Georgetown by Stephen Breyer. I just remember this. I wrote about the REINS Act a few years ago, and he proposed it as a good government way of dealing with this exact problem. So, President Clinton put him on the court, and so Democrats should be happy with it, I would think.
Obviously, it's something that we'll continue to track. The legislation currently moving through the House and the Senate. We'll track it as it makes its way there and then heads on over to Governor Josh Stein's desk. A great update this morning. We appreciate it. Jon Sanders from the John Locke Foundation joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:30, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time for another look at the roadways on your Thursday morning commute. A traffic update with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Don't forget that we are streaming live this morning, each and every weekday morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. If you miss any portion of the show, I encourage you to check out the podcast. It's available in all of your favorite apps. Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour. Tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll take the show with you on demand on your own time. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Well, now that we are a week removed from Governor Josh Stein's first State of the State address, yesterday morning, the governor unveiled his 2025-2027 biennium budget recommendations. The key priorities in the proposal include public education, workforce development, childcare, and public safety. Looking at some details, we spoke to fiscal policy analyst Joseph Harris with the John Locke Foundation. He said Governor Stein's budget proposal recommends spending $36.6 billion in the fiscal year 25-26, or an increase of 6.3% from last year's total of $31 billion. And within the $2 billion increase, $700.3 million would go to Medicaid. Another $703 million would fund increases to state employees and retiree pay, and $153 million would be allocated to the state health plan. Starting off on the governor's priority, we begin with education. Stein prioritizes investment in public education in his proposed plan, aiming to make North Carolina's starting teacher pay the highest in the Southeast, with an average salary of $53,000 by fiscal year 26-27. His plan also includes an average 10.6% pay raise for teachers, as well as reinstating master's degree pay statewide. The education proposal also includes expanding free school breakfast for every student, adding mental health professionals in schools, and proposes a $4 billion bond to address school infrastructure needs. That's something that the governor first brought to attention of state lawmakers last Wednesday during his State of the State address. That $4 billion bond, if to move forward, would be put on a ballot for North Carolinians to vote in favor or against. Funding for the Opportunity Scholarship Program would be placed under a moratorium that offers no new awards and gradually decreases future funding of the program. That puts the governor at odds with state lawmakers and with Republican lawmakers who have expressed interest in fully funding the program. Last year, more than 55,000 families ended up on the Opportunity Scholarship Program waiting list until lawmakers voted to allocate more funds. Joseph Harris said Stein's budget aims to increase pay for teachers and funding for public education at the expense of reducing funding for opportunity scholarships. We then transition into workforce development. Building on some remarks from the governor's State of the State address, Stein advocates for expanding access to free community college in high-demand fields. He also proposes a $20 million investment in apprenticeships and work-based learning programs. The governor said during his presentation Wednesday morning, quote, "I'm also proposing that we expand apprenticeships in state government to recruit and retain talent to serve the public and establish a rural apprenticeship program to connect small businesses and farmers to apprentices so that they can have a pipeline of talent that they need." End quote there from Governor Stein. We then transition into childcare and early education, another main focus for Governor Stein. His plan allocates over $630 million per year to increase childcare subsidies, expand the North Carolina pre-K by adding around 1,000 more seats, and establishing a summer learning program to help pre-K graduates transition into kindergarten. Stein noted, quote, "My budget proposes increasing child care subsidy rates across the state so that providers can increase the salaries of their child care workers and expand pre-K across North Carolina by 1,000 new slots so that more kids show up to kindergarten ready to learn." Public safety, also a major emphasis item for Governor Stein. He did stress the importance of law enforcement in his comments announcing his proposal by saying, quote, "Investing in safety requires investing in professionals who protect us. law enforcement officers put themselves in harm's way to keep our communities safe. But widespread vacancies in law enforcement make it harder for them to do their jobs, end quote there from Governor Stein. His plan increases law enforcement salaries with hiring bonuses to attract new officers, invests in the fentanyl crisis response by adding new drug agents and financial investigators, provides body cameras for all field-based state law enforcement officer, and funds more than 330 new school resource officers. Some other budget area items include over $530 million each year in tax relief, including refund tax credits for working families, child and dependent care, as well as increase of a child tax credit statewide. Some other bullet points include freezing corporate and personal income tax rates. Those are both set to steadily decline in the coming years. The governor wants to freeze those. He does include plans to expand Medicaid, a $500 million reserve for disaster relief, increasing unemployment benefits, raising that maximum weekly payment to $470 a week, and $15 million annually for affordable housing loans, and $35 million via the Housing Finance Agency program. Joseph Harris with the John Locke Foundation reports, since Hurricane Helene, the state's saving reserve balance has decreased from $4.75 billion to $3.73 billion. While Stein's budget proposal recommends allocating $500 million to the state emergency response and disaster relief fund, it fails to replenish the $1 billion that has been withdrawn from the saving reserve. The North Carolina General Assembly is not obligated to act on any recommendations made by the governor, although the governor can propose legislation, and the state constitution grants the General Assembly the ultimate authority over policy changes and budget recommendations. And that's precisely what this is, a budget recommendation from Governor Josh Stein as he brought forth this proposal yesterday. It is we're going to watch a process unfold over the next couple of months, of course, so you are familiar with the budget processes as they went on with Democrat Governor Roy Cooper, constantly at odds, constantly dealing with back and forth between the North Carolina General Assembly and the governor's office. We'll see if the same thing exists with Governor Stein. We'll continue to track the details, and you can check out some of the some more details, including his entire budget proposal this morning over on our website, carolinajournal.com. The headline, Stein budget proposal freezes scheduled tax cuts and boosts spending. It's now 5:43 on the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at your Thursday morning commute and update on the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. hot.
Good morning again. It's 5:50. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We've got some breaking news out of Raleigh this morning. Governor Jon Sanders has approved $524 million in Hurricane Helene relief amid a rebuilding in western North Carolina. More than $500 million in new relief is set to head to the western part of our state, a cash injection intended to boost rebuilding efforts in the region, of course, left by the devastation and destruction of Hurricane Helene. Governor Stein last night signed his first bill into law containing at least $524 million in relief late in the day yesterday after lawmakers unanimously approved the funding in both the House and the Senate. The money is mostly aimed at kickstarting efforts to rebuild homes, farms, and private roads. It also has money for a tourism campaign, which is one of the main drivers of the western North Carolina economy, while also funding to help local governments rebuild their downtown business districts. The governor previously stated that he would sign the bill even though the deal negotiated by Republicans is only half of what he requested. The measure omitted Stein's request for 2 business grant programs that were designed to help companies that suffered significant sales and economic losses or physical damages. Lawmakers call this bill Part 1 of the 25 Hurricane Helene recovery efforts, and Part 2 is likely several months away. The governor said last night that his administration would immediately start on another proposal for more funding to present to the North Carolina legislature, with the governor saying, quote, "We have to reduce the risk of wildfires, particularly as the summer starts to come. We need to invest in resiliency, whether that's how to deal with flooding or down power lines or any other ways to make sure that if the next storm comes, we are better prepared to handle it." After Stein gave the aid final approval on Wednesday, top-ranking Senate officials, including Senate Leader Phil Berger, said he expected the next round of aid would come within the state budget, as lawmakers were scheduled to discuss future funding, and will discuss that this afternoon during a joint appropriations committee hearing. The budget technically due by July 1st. If you're somebody that follows North Carolina politics pretty closely, you've known that in the past couple of years, lawmakers often blow well past that deadline. Senate Leader Berger said that if the 2025 budget debate runs into problems, that he would in fact support passing a Helene aid as a separate standalone bill. House Speaker Destin Hall said during the Stein signing ceremony, quote, "The number one priority that we have at the General Assembly this session is Hurricane Helene recovery, and it's going to stay that way until we fix the problem." He noted the level of compromise between the House, Senate, and the governor required to turn this bill around so quickly. And Hall wrapped up his comments by saying, "Tomorrow, we'll begin working on the next round of relief for Helene because it's going to be a long recovery with the incredible devastation in western North Carolina." The most destructive storm in state history, Helene killed more than 100 North Carolinians and did an estimated $60 billion in damage for the western half of the state last fall, including damaging over 74,000 homes and businesses. Those homes and businesses either damaged or completely destroyed in the devastation that the storm left behind. Lawmakers had already approved roughly $1 billion in state aid last year to supplement the projected $15 billion that is slated to come in from the federal government. But some, if not most of that federal funding, including any money to start rebuilding homes, is at least several months away from reaching North Carolina. This new infusion of cash from state taxpayers will allow work to begin on rebuilding homes in the meantime. The bill also funds efforts to rebuild farms, private roads, and more relief efforts, as well as to finish rebuilding efforts in the eastern half of North Carolina from Hurricanes Florence and Matthew that affected the state nearly a decade ago. That was at the hands of former Governor Roy Cooper and his North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. The state's struggles with Matthew and Florence recovery have been blamed on a large variety of causes, with former Governor Cooper as well as the federal government under Presidents Joe Biden and Donald Trump all taking blame. Stein's first action as governor was to create a new agency to handle relief in the western half of the state, taking the job away from the agency that had handled the recovery in the eastern part. That is now the GROW NC office, the Governor's Recovery Office for Western North Carolina, which is slated to handle that relief in the western half of the state. This legislation is now moved through both the House and the Senate, signed by Governor Stein last night, and it is now officially law. $524 million in relief for Western North Carolina. Speaking of Western North Carolina, tonight is a deadline to comment on North Carolina's proposed action plan for a $1.4 billion community development block grant disaster for Western North Carolina. The action plan outlines the main plans, such as providing grants for reconstruction, funding for the construction of units to purchase by low and moderate income households, and establishes a small rental and multifamily construction program. The Commerce Secretary, Lillian, said, quote, "I encourage everyone, especially those directly impacted by Hurricane Helene, to read our proposal for these critical federal funds and provide suggestions for the best way forward. Our team at the Commerce Department is moving as quickly as possible to complete the necessary steps to begin receiving federal relief money that we have been promised. Out of the $1.4 billion allocated to the state for Helene from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, $807 million is allocated to owner-occupied unit reconstruction and rehabilitation." We'll have some more details on this grant coming up for you tomorrow morning. Well, that's going to do it for a Thursday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We are back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.